Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2021 Sunstone Symposium. My name's Heidi. I'm moderating this session. You are at session 154, Reclaiming Spiritual Power and Internal Authority. At Sunstone, we are making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, "There is more than one way to Mormon." We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. After the symposium, Sunstone staff will edit, polish, and re-upload all of this year's session videos to the Whova app. It will take about 2 weeks, and once it's available, all the videos will be available to watch and rewatch until the end of 2021. And if you are here in person, when we do the Q&A, we'll have the microphone up here. And if you're watching this digitally, you can enter in questions in the Whova app. If they are not answered here, our presenters can go in and then type in responses later on. A little bit about this presentation. An increasing number of Latter-day Saints are confronting dissonance between the church's claim to truth as revealed and interpreted through modern prophets and their own spiritual and intellectual experience. As members of the church, we have received many messages that suggest we must follow the prophets and that our own understanding may be dangerous or could lead us astray. In this session, we will challenge this narrative and illustrate how trusting in our own spiritual authority can open up new levels of spiritual depth, help us reclaim our worth, and have confidence in our chosen religious and spiritual journeys. And then a little bit about our lovely presenters. Sara Hughes-Zabawa is a licensed clinical social worker, certified Daring Way facilitator, and wellness coach working with Symmetry Solutions to offer online therapy and wellness coaching. Sara often works with individuals, couples, and families who are impacted by a shift in their spiritual beliefs and who are seeking support in entering this new awakening with better balance, healthier boundaries, and improved trust in themselves, moving forward in a meaningful way. Janice Spangler is a graduate of the University of Utah, Integral Coaching Canada, and the Living School, and works as an integral professional life coach with Symmetry Solutions, specializing in coaching individuals, couples, and families affected by the difficulties of shifting faith. She is a frequent podcast guest, a speaker at conferences, workshops, firesides, and retreats, and has lectured as a guest at BYU on issues of faith and development. I'm sure we're all very looking forward to this session. Thank you. We'll give the time to you.
Good. Thank you, Heidi. Okay, we're just going to dive right in. We want to welcome you to the journey, and this is a journey. We want to start with a quote by Walt Whitman. "Re-examine all you have been told in church, in school or church, or in any book, and dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem."
First of all, Jana and I picked this topic in March, and I don't know if it's just like karma or God has a really good sense of humor. But within our own personal lives, our professional lives, and our public lives, we've been really humbled the past few months. So we just want to really let you know how grateful we are to be here, and at the same time, by no means are we master teachers. If anything, maybe student teachers, probably more humbly, just teachers. Just students. In this journey, we've learned that in reclaiming our spiritual authority, it is not a destination. It really is a journey. It's a messy, beautiful, imperfect practice. And we're grateful to be among fellow students in the journey.
One thing that I always like to talk about when I talk about these issues is that we can't talk about these issues without discomfort. There is going to be a lot of challenge that comes up in your life. It's reflected in our presentation. You may feel some discomfort here. I always feel like a mature journey that speaks about, to the depth of this journey. It invites us to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And this journey has a whole lot of opportunity for both.
I want to just check in with our bodies. I remember the very first time I came to Sunstone 5 years ago, I think I walked around with like my whole chest broken out in hives because I felt so viscerally uncomfortable, because Sunstone meant something to me then that is very different than it means now. And even in talking about reclaiming spiritual authority, the front row will see I'll still break out in hives on my chest because my body remembers that these are culturally taboo topics for me to discuss. So I just want to really make sure that we're honoring that discomfort is because growth is hella uncomfortable, and we need to acknowledge that reality. So be good to yourselves. Take deep breaths.
All right, we're going to dive in. So how did we get here? What is this journey? So the first thing we want to acknowledge is that our spiritual grounding has been largely in stage 3 churches, whether it's the mainstream LDS church or another. Most Christian churches in the West thrive under this paradigm of Fowler stage 3. And if any of you are not familiar with Fowler stage 3, there's lots of information about that. But as a broad category, stage 3 churches are great at organization. They're great at structure. They thrive on authority. They thrive on conformity. And there are a lot of pressures that come with it. They can offer an amazing container for our early development and growth and identity development. And they also tend to hold on to that paradigm for the rest of somebody's life, when the reality is that more and more and more adults are hitting a place where they are having needs and spiritual needs that are growing outside of those bounds. And when that happens, that's when this journey really gets real and tough. So while we have the supportive structure of correlated teachings, and we have a safety and a beautiful container, it causes some challenges at a certain point in our journey. This is normal of all human beings, that early in life, we prioritize our belonging over our authenticity. Both of those are very innate, inherent human needs. But it is the wisdom, it's the human wisdom of the journey and that we've inherited from our evolution, is that a human child needs to prioritize their belonging over their authenticity, and that is developmentally appropriate early in our stages of growth. Some of the things that come out of that is that our choices are limited. The choices over how we show up, our attitudes, our behavior. There are guidelines, there are strict boundaries. They're not uber strict. There are groups that are more strict in some of these things, but the LDS faith has a lot of boundaries, and our choices are limited. Our spiritual practices are prescribed. They're the Sunday school answers, and those are the things that are supposed to connect every person throughout their life to God. And if it doesn't work for you, you just need to try harder, Mormon harder, and it will solve everything, right?
Can I give an example
Please.
of that? When you think of a traditional LDS prayer, you know exactly what that recipe or format looks like, right? So we've been given a very structured beginning, kind of ending, closure of a prayer. No one gave us the alternative to meditation or lighting incense or lighting a candle. So that's just an example of one really common prescribed practice that was given us to say, this is how you spiritually connect. Mm-hmm. And while for many of us that worked up into a certain point, for some people that never worked. Maybe nature is their prayer. Maybe walking is their prayer. but we have very prescribed examples of how faith is done.
And even in that, we often prioritize not the connection or experience with God. It's keeping us on the path that those things are supposed to do for us. So examples of faith development from the institution and that we talk about openly as a group, people do move beyond stage 3 and stay within the church. But it's limited. We don't see big examples of that happening. People are typically more inner when this happens, and for many, there's not a lot of dissonance because their personalities naturally line up with the system. So maybe for them, the spiritual practices that are prescribed work very well. So our outward examples of this are rare. So when we start hitting this in a big way, we feel really lost because we think something is wrong with us. I also want to note this. This is something that I've noticed as I've talked about Fowlers, I've talked about development throughout the community. I noticed that there's an assumption that if you are starting to have questions about the faith, questions about the historicity, questions about the way the church does things, we often think that means we're moving into a stage 4 faith. And that is not necessarily the truth. Stage 3 faith crisis is a very different thing than a stage 4 faith crisis. And very often what happens in that place is that we move from a very certain place, an us versus them, like I have all the truth in the world, and if I could just get other people in the world in the same room with me and they could hear me speak, they would all join the church. And it flips pretty quickly in a stage 3 faith crisis to the opposite. If I could just get with all of those Mormons and sit them down for 5 minutes and tell them what I've learned, they would all leave the church with me.
I mean, Jana, it's a funner stage 3.
It is a funner stage 3.
I mean, if we're really honest,
100%.
That certainty has a little bit more fun.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you're not seeing the emotional and spiritual development because it's not linked to individual knowing. It's linked to a certainty that you've prescribed now to everyone else. Mm-hmm. And that's where if you're so uncomfortable right now, like, welcome to that party. It's uncomfortable. It's easier to be certain. We were once certain. And even in our disbelief or in our crisis, if we stay just in that certainty that we are right and everyone else is wrong, we've missed the developmental spiritual opportunity to go farther and beyond that.
It also provides, I think, some emotional stability as you go through it, because if you're sure, like, screw what anyone else thinks, right? They're just wrong. So it's often a softer landing in some ways if we can just retain our certainty.
And yet we want to allow you to claim what is certain for you at any phase in your development.
And strangely, even as stage 4, which is by definition an individuated faith, we're taking in, we are starting to look at our own authority, our own beliefs. We're taking them deeply into our heart. As we start to do that within the structure of the church, this becomes so hard. This is a really, really difficult part of the journey.
Jenna, can I add on what you said? So oftentimes when we find ourselves in a faith crisis, a faith awakening, or a faith expansion, we have a cultural narrative of what is wrong with me. Yeah. I want to gently reframe that as, how does this make sense? You're here right now. This is not a deficit experience. This is a growth experience. And because we don't have that cultural narrative, we usually have to find other people who can sit with us and recognize it makes so much sense. You're here right now, exactly where you are, emotionally and spiritually and mentally.
Yep. This becomes an invitation into accepting things the way that they are, and being able to feel really solid in that, which takes a lot of time. So this is called the A-qual quadrants. This is a Ken Wilber framing. I'm not expecting anyone to totally understand all of this, but I like this framing to help explain a little bit why so many people struggle with trusting themselves as they go through a faith crisis, a faith shift. So if you look at the left side of these quadrants is our interior experience. So, and then on the right, it's exterior. So the interior subjective experience of our lives, how we're experiencing the world, our interior, emotions and connections. The exterior on the right side, this is like the realm of science, scientific observation. We can verify. And the top sections it's an individual experience, just you, and it's a collective experience on the bottom. So on the bottom left, we're dealing with culture, we're dealing with a collective, we're dealing with our cultures and beliefs and value relations between ourselves. On the lower right, we're looking at systems and governments and institutions. So one of the things that you'll notice is that we are told a narrative about what personal revelation and the Spirit is, right? Which truly should be an upper left experience. These quadrants have very technical names: upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. Very technical. We are having an upper left experience when we are having an experience with personal revelation and with the Spirit, right? But what are we told? That can validate the right side. Your interior experience can validate what you know historically. I heard that historical fact, and it's not the historians and the science that is going to validate that. It's the upper left experience. What happens when you find out historical facts or scientific facts that then negate the story that your interior told you was true? Well, for a large number of us, we just say, well, our interior is broken. And that is not a useful way to come to truth, right? We're not knowing that these are two completely different kinds of truth. And that religion really probably never should have been in that upper right place, right? It's the structure that maybe helps us access something interior. But we need to be clear about our interior experiences of what that can actually testify of in our lives. So many people move into this, and developmentally we get to a place where we're just wanting to only rely on the rational, right? But spiritual experience has to encompass all of it. It's not just an exterior experience, it's not just an interior experience.
And to make sure we're creating a sense of real safety. Jana, are you done with that one?
Yeah.
So sorry.
To
make sure we're creating a real safety and spectrum of belief from active believing member all the way to an atheist, non-believing member. I want to make sure before we move into this conversation, we ask you to close your eyes and think about what does the divine mean for you. That simply might be your unique inner sense of knowing that is divine. You might literally believe in a higher power, a heavenly parent. I just want you to know that when Jana and I are talking about spirituality, divinity, God, we're letting you determine what that definition means. We don't have an agenda or a knowing about that here.
And we will get to some reframing of some of those terms that can be really sticky.
Many of us in our LDS upbringing, we had the understanding that church equaled God. That was how I was raised. I was raised in a very heterogeneous, very high concentrated Mormon community here in Utah. I did not have the understanding or differentiation power to see anything different. I think many of our converts, many of our members outside of the church have different understandings of that, but many individuals that Jana and I work with professionally have the hardest level with a faith transition if God equaled church. Sometimes our families had enough differentiation where that wasn't the same thing, that church was a structure. Church was a place where you took your unique relationship with a higher power and practiced it. many of us, especially those born in kind of the late 80s and were raised through the 90s and the early 2000s, that was not our experience. Prophets were the equivalent of God. Church leaders were the equivalent of God, or spoke to God, received from God. So I want to name why are we here? And we have a really hard relationship with the institutional church, is because there was never any differentiation. For those of you smiling, this has never been a challenge, because there was always a differentiation. So just want to be really humble and bring forward the quote from our dear friend Maxine Hanks. When we give our decisions over to someone else, we lose our divine guidance. We lose our internal knowing because we have outsourced it. We've outsourced what is good, true, real for the unique sense of self. So I just want to be really humble that if you have relationships to both of those pictures, it's because we come with really ingrained stories about what that means.
And in that, we also tend to conflate religiosity and spirituality. If you think about, oh, that person is so spiritual in our words, what does that mean? They're doing all the things. They follow the program, but what we're really describing is religiosity very often. It is, we really aren't seeing into their hearts. We're not really seeing into their inner work and their inner transformation. And so, again, that's when we start struggling with the structure, very often it's really hard to notice that those are different things. And if you listen to a lot of general conference talks, things like that, you will hear them speak about prophets, the church, and God interchangeably. There's no distinction between all of them.
And Jana, we were going to mention on this slide, Jana and I have 3 mutual friends who have very different relationships with the institutional church. One of them, in their own sense of knowing, has been able to find great beauty in their participation within the church while still very much within their integrity, because God did not equal the church. We have a dear friend who has been excommunicated and has returned. And one of the reasons why is because God has never equaled the church. The church is a community in which to practice expansion and wrestle and humanity. We also have a dear friend who has left the church and has found a different spiritual home because the institutional structure was damning to their soul, to set their sense of knowing. And the beautiful thing which moves us from a stage 3 to a stage 4 is we trust their knowing that that's exactly where they need to be, with the permission to shift and change, but they are also living into their integrity, which can really, if we've experienced religious trauma, there's a huge pushback against us in that. We don't want to give them that. And I want to just give you the permission that your knowing is just as valid as theirs, wherever you are.
Yeah, very often we see people kind of retreating into their camps and saying, well, if that person is still in the church, this is what that means, and this is what they must affirm, and this is what they must not affirm, because again, we're not giving people the ability to have this very different inner knowing and be differentiated from the group.
And the key part of why they're healthy and well is because there was choice. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. Why don't you go and talk?
Yeah, so when we talk about spiritual identity development and even just identity of self, when we're born, we have our unique sense of self, but it's kind of held in this container. The best example is my daughter, Daisy. She's 3 years old, and while I fully acknowledge that she is her unique sense of self, if she made all the decisions, she would have joined a nudist colony by now. She would be eating ice cream and only ice cream for breakfast. There would never be any sleeping, and there would be no sharing. Right? Like, that is her unique sense of self. And while that is beautiful, a part of my job as a mother is to create a container where we balance a little bit of that, right? And so I think, so oftentimes, this is how we develop, right? Our parents give us a sense of purpose, values, family values. We experience and understand the rules of our government. We understand our community's social norms. this is a part of really normal development. And Jana, will you tell me what Richard Rohr says about kind of early spiritual development up until teen years in the LDS faith?
Oh, yeah. He just mentioned to me when he found out that I was LDS, I studied directly with Richard Rohr, and he just said to me, you Mormons do first half of life better than anyone, bar none. Like, you're really, really good at it. And I think he, from an outsider's view, diagnosed, and you have very, very little second half of life. And I think that is true of their correlated church.
And so, once again, we've outsourced a lot of our spiritual authority. So typically our traditional LDS teachings, we're outsourcing what food we eat, what beverages we drink, how we go to church, when we go to church, what time we go to church, the congregation in which we're serving. We don't get to choose our pastor, ecclesiastical leader. I didn't get to choose my underwear. It is outsourced, right? And for a really young development, there's not a lot of thinking necessary. Right? We have a very prescribed spiritual practice. I was taught the importance of service and what faith looks like in a very kind of boxed up, beautiful bow tied, right, experience. And while that has its function and its purpose, we were never developmentally made to stay there. And yet so often when we're in our, when we're having a faith awakening or a transition in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and we're wondering, where has there ever been a sense of spiritual authority, knowing what really moves me, what makes me feel alive? It's because unbeknown to us, because it's all it's been known and modeled, is we've outsourced our knowing over and over and over again. And it's really interesting because I'll have clients who didn't outsource their knowing. This wrestle does not feel as devastating and life-altering, but it matters how much we outsourced from the very beginning.
And if you had asked me as a young adult, did you have choice in what you chose for your career, or how you were going to spend your time as an adult, I would have said, oh yeah, I have all the choice in the world. I have all the choices. But looking back, I see that very differently. Like, I had the choice that would be happy and make God happy, of being a stay-at-home mom, and that I could be really good, and that's how I was going to be happy and honor all that was good in the world and in myself. Or I could, be selfish, and I could do something that would really mess with and would mess up my children for life, and might mess up their eternities. And I just want to note that that's not really a choice. If I'm telling you, you have a choice of chocolate cake or cardboard, I don't know that that's really a choice. I'm going to go with the cake, and I'm going to feel really good about myself because I'm going to see all the reasons why the cake was the good choice, right? But unless you are in a place where you understand that there is more than that it's the other choice is more than just cardboard, right? That's not really a choice.
And oftentimes in kind of normal spiritual development and sense of identity development, in non-high demand religions, we start shifting the size of self and the pushback for outer authority in teenagehood and early adulthood. That's when we start getting messy and we make mistakes. And yet so oftentimes, because there wasn't the space, the permission, the modeling, or the narratives that allowed that to be normal, there wasn't an adolescent understanding of self. But this is what it was supposed to look like. Identity development is supposed to be this combination of a deep understanding of who you are in combination with the wisdom, the direction, sometimes a sense of safety and insight of outer authority. The difference between health and wellness is the ability to choose. So oftentimes with clients, especially in the midst of mixed faith couples or in faith crisis, feeling forced to leave the institution creates a sense of deep distress because it is not a personal knowing and choice. At the same time, individuals who feel stuck that they cannot leave in honoring their knowing, that creates incredible emotional distress. I don't know if any of you listened to Glennon Doyle's podcast. I'm a big fan. And she had a really good example of what actual bravery looks like. She had 2 daughters, and they went to get their ears pierced. The youngest one was like so excited and was like, bring it on, and got her ears pierced. And everyone was like, that's so brave. And then the other daughter was like, I'm here. It's not the right choice. We don't celebrate the bravery of knowing. Both experiences of those daughters were brave because it honored choice. I want to really get clear that notice, okay, that's another slide, but just really recognize there was supposed to be this balance. There was supposed to be the agency of recognizing all of the wisdom outside of us and then integrating it within the self to understand what is the right choice for you.
So I stole this concept shamelessly from Richard Rohr. This is his example of discernment and how do we know what we know, that age-old question of epistemology, right? So I took it and Mormonized it, and this is what I came up with, is that we kind of have 2 tricycles. And we have an early development tricycle that sometimes we stay in forever. But if we do this development, we can grow into a different tricycle. And so the first tricycle, the front wheel is oversized. It's an old-fashioned tricycle, right? And the front wheel represents the authorized prophetic voices within the institution, right? That leads the way. That takes precedence. You have these back wheels to support you, and you've got scripture and your own, scripture reading, and you've got personal revelation. And we talk a lot about personal revelation, and I just want to be clear that it is relegated to a confirmation tool. And it is also kind of a confirmation from an outer source of the permission to make a choice for ourselves. Like, I'm not really sure I should make that choice of who to marry or to do unless I get that outside confirmation, and then we all drive ourselves crazy trying to figure out if we got that and if we got it sufficiently, right? So they're there, but they are really in service of that front wheel.
Mm-hmm. The mature spiritual formation is once again the driving force, the power that propels us forward is a deep trust and inner knowing. Our own values, our own sense of self, our lived experience integrated in the choices we're making. And the back wheels are wisdom traditions. Maybe that's from our LDS upbringing or our LDS participation. Maybe that's from the Buddha. Maybe that is from Eckhart Tolle. I mean, wherever you find wisdom that drives you forward, that gives you life, that gives you joy, that your heart is soft in. And oftentimes, that's the prophetic revelation wherever it is found.
Brene Brown is one of my prophetesses, so we're clear.
100% Brene. So, I think what we recognize, though, is you're like, well, great. I was never given any outside prophetic wisdom. So, what in the world am I supposed to do now? That's where you follow your joy. That's where you follow it. Something you read it. Maybe it's poetry. Maybe it's nature. Maybe we're going to have some other examples. Mm-hmm. But once again, the front wheel has to be you. And
I want to just name that this makes us super uncomfortable. This makes us really uncomfortable, especially...
breakout and hives uncomfortable.
Yeah, I talked to I'm in a mixed faith marriage. I talked to my husband who's just super dedicated in the church. And I just talk about how I want that front wheel to be, this, and I want my back wheels to include more. And it's just like, whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing here? It's really, really scary. And yet, the truth is that I've spent so much time in that front place that I have become trustworthy. I have really good development. I have good values. Mm-hmm. And so often when I work with people, I just have to remind us, you're not going to suddenly become a serial killer. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure you can trust yourself. That if something is resonating, and I also like to tell people, this is incredibly Mormon. If you go back, there are some really great quotes from Joseph Smith talking about how he didn't like creeds, he just wanted to think for himself, and even Brigham Young as well. Like, wherever we find truth, we're just a collection receptacle of truth, whether it comes from the Methodist or the heathen. We really don't care where it comes from. There was never this message of, and it will all come through me. And that's it. Like, there was a sense of collective wisdom and a sense of common consent. So I own this. I feel like this is very Mormon. So when people push back and say you're scary, I say, well, so is Joseph, so we're good.
And notice, Jana, when you just said that, our early church leaders had more ability to develop spiritually than many of us as congregants have been able to.
Absolutely. Because we found the formula. They set up the formula, but now we've made it like, as my father used to say, we believe in free agency and how to enforce it.
And I think people are aching for this, because even within culturally traditional practicing members of the LDS faith, I'm seeing this like really interesting reemergence of like energy work within the faith practice. I'm seeing people be able to utilize like Kundalini yoga in a way that feels in alignment or in conjunction with their spiritual beliefs and practices. People are aching for other ways to practice their spiritual sense of knowing and alignment, but once again, they're trying to do it in a way that confirms everything from the institutional perspective. And I want to really honor whatever path you get to knowing yourself better. I'm gonna be kind and soft with, but it's fascinating to watch people bring in more Eastern practices. One of the funniest fights my husband and I ever had is I was like, I just didn't know I was a Mormon Buddhist. I think you don't know until you know through exposure of different practices. It's really interesting.
Okay, so we just really like this, speaking of Buddhism, we like this, this is from the Buddha. He said, I am the finger, meaning him, the Buddha and his teachings. I am the finger pointing to the moon. Don't look at me, look at the moon. And this is just another way of saying, don't conflate the church, the ritual, the teachings. Do not conflate that with what it is we're actually trying to do through our religiosity and our spirituality. Like, you know, even within, when you were saying like different families were more able to do this, like it was very different in personality just between me and my sister. My sister has had a much softer spiritual journey because she never conflated God with the church. She was always on her own path with that. I was not. So this has been a wrestle. And when I first heard this thing from the Buddha, I'm just like, oh, it all makes sense. Right?
And I want to honor, Jana, if the experience of the institutional church has been traumatic for you. I don't need you to look at the finger anymore. Yep. But I want you to still be able to wonder about the moon. Yep. Even if the moon is just you, meaning the moon is just you inside yourself. Yep. But I think so oftentimes when there's deep religious trauma, we just stop looking away at both. And there's still safety in different, softer ways to look at whatever the moon represents to you.
Even if it's your deepest self, and truly I believe that that is where any kind of healing ultimately comes from, is from our deep, recognizing and uncovering the deep wellness within ourselves.
Just because Jan and I can't do a presentation without poetry. So, the soul wants nothing but God, must forsake everything, even God. As long as we have and know who God is, we don't. We are far away. So can you let your notions die? This is the smallest death a soul can undergo before it becomes divine. Meister Eckhart, our dear friend Britt, sent us this poem, and I want to just really acknowledge that for many people who've experienced spiritual abuse or incredible cognitive dissonance, as with the church being God, sometimes there absolutely needs to be physical, psychic, or membership differentiation in space to even know oneself again. To be able to know God, your inner sense of knowing, the inner light in yourself. I want to just really be respectful that sometimes we have to lose it all to begin to know. And then there's other people based on their personalities, their lived experiences, where that looks so deeply different. But this feels real to me.
Yeah.
This is what I've had to do to be well.
Yep. Okay. So I heard these 3 questions from an interview that Reza Aslan did with Oprah. And I love these 3 questions because this is so not the way I was raised to see this, and it opened up a whole different world of giving myself permission to do things differently, right? So he says in a conversation with somebody about God, about their spirituality, he just has these 3 questions. The first question is, do you believe that there is something beyond this material world? Do you believe that there's some sort of something else out there? If you don't, that's fine. You're an atheist. Be happy. Go your way. But if your answer is yes, the second question is, if you do believe that there's something else, do you want to experience it? Do you want to commune with it? Do you want to feel it in your life? Do you want to experience it? And if your answer is no, you're agnostic. That's fine. Go your way. Be happy. But if your answer is yes,
we love you.
We love you. We love you all so much. And I'm so glad you're going with your inner knowing, by the way. But if your answer is yes, then the question is just simply how? Through religion, through relationships, through nature? What connects you? What spiritual practices connect you? Mm-hmm. What actually makes you feel that transcendence that is well documented, not just in crazy religious world, but also psychologically? And there's something to this. Do what does that for you. If the metaphors that you were raised with don't work, find new metaphors. If the pattern of prayer does not work for you anymore, find a new pattern of prayer. Mm-hmm. Frankly, if you are growing, the way that you connect and the way that you pray is going to change. Mm-hmm. If you haven't changed since you were 4, it may be a place to look at. Mm-hmm. There may be something more there.
Jana, can I add to that?
Mm-hmm.
When I talk to my clients about, in their faith transition, usually there's a space where there needs to be like emotional, psychic, physical difference from all of their previous prescribed faith practices. So if that was scripture study, if that was prayer, if that was church attendance, if that was communal worship, I want to respect that. But at the same time, ingredients of that allow people to be well. So when I think about prayer, the ingredients of prayer typically is a softness. There's a stillness, there's a gratitude, there's a reflection. There's usually like this deep seat of connection. And while I don't care who you're praying to, I don't even care if we're praying to someone, the ingredients of prayer still might be a part of your own unique spiritual practice.
Google atheist prayer. You'll be amazed at how much comes up.
Yeah, service, scripture study, if we no longer feel safe in a traditional text. The practice of scripture study was pausing, it was reading, it was interpreting, it was about getting curious about what this means to your life. Find something safe to re-enter that practice with, because the practice itself can be a part of deep self-knowing, but because it was so prescribed and so deeply traumatic, we don't even have the permission and creativity to reclaim it. So what I see is that's where people stay in that certainty of the new stage 3 of like, nothing is real. Well, nothing might be real, but some of the practices, the ingredients of the practices you have ingrained in your life that allowed you to be well and allowed you to step into an internal knowing are also now gone. If you want to be well, we have to, what brought you alive? It might be a song. It might be a dance party in the kitchen. Like, we got to get creative because we do not have those offerings organically given to us. And we're really used to having our spiritual language, our spiritual practices handed to us. But a part of natural adulthood is getting curious and reclaiming. Yeah. But I would encourage you, go to the ingredients.
And at the core of this, right, is this idea that there is no proof. When it comes to our spiritual lives, there's no proof one way or the other. And this is not about that. We're so ingrained in, is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Mm-hmm. Right? But at the core of this is that nothing is proof. Even our spiritual confirmations may or not be proof. This is an issue of want. This is an issue of faith. This is an issue of what will make me well. What am I being called to?
It's also a practice. So for example, so oftentimes we had spiritual practices that we were really comfortable with, like prayer. A very traditional LDS prayer was something that was deeply comfortable with because I had done it for decades. When I started exploring different ways to pray, was it uncomfortable? Did I feel like an idiot? If we were looking again for a level of deep comfort without practicing it for decades, we're setting ourselves up for unrealistic expectations. The first time I went to a yoga class, felt like an idiot, right? We don't like discomfort because we're so used to certainty. No spiritual practice is going to feel certain until you practice it, till you know it, till you reclaim it. So oftentimes we want to go into a new spiritual practice with the same comfort that we used to sing a hymn, without the years and years of dedicated exploration.
I will also say sometimes there's an opposite experience. For me, the first time I actually allowed myself to pray in a different format that worked for me, I swear to you, the heavens opened in a way I had never, ever experienced before. And I just sat in shock and awe for like 3 days going, what just happened to me? Is this what people are talking about? Oh, wow.
Yeah, sometimes there's a deep resistance, and sometimes there's an immediate knowing.
Relief.
A sense of homeness.
Relief.
Okay, so why is this so devastatingly hard to claim our inner knowing? First, we need to really understand the generational and evolutionary discomfort and differentiation. I loved what Krista Tippett said last night. Or Lindsay even said last night, survival was linked to cohesion. When we differentiated from the tribe, it means we could have died. Our pioneer ancestry was able to do what they were able to do in an unknown land because there was cohesion or assumed cohesion. When you differentiate, there is a neurological, biological experience of mass discomfort. Once again, this is situational to your family of origin, the community in which you were raised in, your sense of differentiation, exposure to difference as a child and young adult. But if there is like that moment where you are terrified to do what is right for you, and you don't understand why something so small feels so devastatingly terrifying, it's because this is neurological. And while it kept us alive in the past, it's keeping us small now. And it's going to be a very delicate wrestle. And this is where Jana and I are so humble that this process of differentiation is confusing, and it is messy, and it is contradictory, and your loved ones don't get it, and you don't get it, it is so, so beautifully challenging. And so differentiation in general is this deep understanding of process of becoming in relationship to growth and development, but it's specifically linked to what is recognizing what is unique to your own sense of self. And so it's really hard to step into that practice when life commitments have been made. So I think one of the hardest parts to differentiate is in your adulthood, when people have known you for decades as a symbol of cohesion. It's confusing, and it also disrupts both your ego and the other person's ego. And I think we need to really acknowledge that not all friendships or relationships can survive the discomfort of differentiation. And the various levels of pain, because there will be some people in this room who I know and love that was like, it's never been painful. Once again, we're going to go back to that relationship to institutional church as God. That's a big shift that I've seen regarding the crisis, mental health crisis associated with differentiation. But it's also personal, it's relational, it's familiar. If there's cultural safety in differentiation, there's usually less of a psychic crisis. So we need to be, this is really serious. And as a mental health therapist, differentiation without love, support, and witnessing and normalizing moves us into some of the very greatest forms of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And at the very core, it is grief. Because there is profound loss of what once was, right? And so it's interesting when that differentiation of self, when you merge what is right for me, what is right for my knowing within our cultural context or our marriages or our friendships, how it is received is also depends on how traumatic it is. I was talking to Jana, the difference in abuse, when someone experiences a traumatic experience, the difference in the level of healing and long-term impact is based on typically one thing: if it is believed. How many in your faith crisis were not believed? If you are not believed, that turns into complex aspects of complex trauma. I don't want to assume that everyone experiences that way, but we need to acknowledge that reality. If we're not believed and witnessed, this is really delicate. So the antidote to the pain of differentiation is the ability to be witnessed and believed. And I want to name how support and companionship is necessary. One of the reasons that I'm committed to coming back each year to Sunstone is in the very early parts of my faith crisis, I didn't have, I'll get emotional, I didn't have relationships that could handle my differentiation. And people in this room saved my life because it was the first time I felt believed. And it was the first time I didn't feel crazy. We need people to believe us and to not be threatened by our differentiation process. And so that is what is so important. And the hard part is I think many of us come in, especially if you're gregarious and have large social networks, we think like 30 people are going to show up and be able to differentiate with you. I haven't found that, team. I've found 1 to 3 is how many people you usually need to survive this level of differentiation and stepping back into oneself. We need support and companionship. Does that make sense? And we need safety, and we need to consider how to be supported. When I support a client who's in a domestically violent relationship, Jana. Is that better? So when someone's in an abusive relationship, so oftentimes we just want to yell leave, and sometimes it's absolutely essential that they leave within 24 hours. Most oftentimes there needs to be a safety net. There needs to be a plan, right, to help them prepare to make the next step. And so wherever you are in your spiritual journey, and if there needs to be big or monumental changes or even little changes, it's really important to have a plan, to have a safety net, which is why I really encourage mental health support, coaching support, but being able to have someone help you through that journey so less destruction, less hard and long-term consequences happen.
And I would also just like to name that developmentally in a lot of the world, if you're not brought up in a very strict religious structure, this differentiation happens quite naturally during adolescence and when people move off to college and they kind of differentiate. They have that freedom and they figure out who they are and they plan their lives accordingly. Mm-hmm. What we're finding so much now is that we were brought up in a very strict, those of us who are in our 30s, 40s, 50s, were brought up in a very strict time period of the church, really. Probably the most heightened period of structure. Like, it's this, what I see as a reaction to the 60s and to, like, the world going to hell in a handbasket. We've got to tighten things up and do it right? And so many of us in that age group, older age groups, are starting to feel this, but now differentiation is even harder because you've signed up for a program with a spouse often that, like, this was what we are going to do until we die. and beyond, forever, right?
Forever.
And that feeling of lack of choice just goes through the roof. So so yes, we see a lot of this at Symmetry Solutions. We see a lot of this in our social circles. We feel this. This is why it's so hard, people.
And so with that, why aren't there more people in these seats, right? It feels so easy and so fun. So
we're really selling it here, aren't we?
Like, surprise!
Join
sign
us.
Up. Okay. And yet, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So if you're here, welcome to the wilderness. So fun. Liberating and terrifying simultaneously. Belonging so fully to yourself that you're willing to stand alone is a wilderness, an untamed, unpredictable place of solitude and searching. It is a place as dangerous as it is breathtaking, a place as sought after as it is feared. In the exchange for deeply knowing yourself, getting curious about your needs, wants, what brings you alive, what you truly believe, you are likely to become misunderstood and mistrusted. Jana and I have experienced that in some of the most wounding and painful ways, both within our families, within our communities.
And we tend to question and misunderstand ourselves, frankly. This is I think Disney screwed up a lot for us. Like anything in relationships and love, like forget you knew that. But where I think they're really strong, look at Tangled. I mean, the scene, right, where she's like, I'm free, I'm the worst daughter ever, I gotta go back. It's all over the place, right? That it's encapsulated, it's the freedom, but it's also this is crushing. Moana, Frozen, they're starting to get it right with this stuff. They can do some differentiation, gut-wrenching work fairly well, so.
So if it's confusing and messy, it's normal. Oftentimes in circles or in families or communities or friendship groups of really low differentiation, you lose trust. Because once again, survival was on cohesion. When our egos are completely validated and safe within cohesion, someone pushing against boundaries, against norms, against set and standard beliefs become dangerous. It doesn't help that we come from a cultural tradition that magnifies and cultivates narratives that the discomfort of someone being angry or in deep grief of a faith transition also looks like or appears messy, disorganized, sinful to the outside observer. So once again, we also have narratives that are cultivating other people's mistrust and misunderstanding of us. Also, this is really hard, but we can't transplant our own knowing onto someone else. I've tried, really hard, you guys. It doesn't work. But we can merely invite. But it's a deep surrender. I think many of us in the midst of this awakening are like, if they just only knew, or if they only understood. It takes a very open, mature person to sit with someone else's knowing without the need to challenge it. That is often rare where we come from, except if you close your eyes, you might have met someone. We usually know in our heart who those people have been for us, those soft landing points, soft landing parts. There is no growth without discomfort, without getting uncomfortable. I want to be really honest that for many of us who come from a heteronormative, Caucasian upbringing, this is the very first taste of marginalization we've ever experienced. It's the very first time we've been othered. There's some growth and deep empathy that comes from that experience when you've been a majority, and then you become a minority within your spiritual community. I want to create some space to talk about the minorities in our faith community, specifically women and our queer brothers and sisters, our queer family. There's a beautiful song by Tish Melton that said, "We stopped asking directions from places they've never been." Women, if you're looking to your male leaders to help you understand your divine feminine energy, You might need to stop asking directions from places they've never been.
So I just want people to take this into their heart as they decide to go talk to their bishop about their faith crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so if you're going to like sit in a temple recommend interview and... So should I tell my story,
Yes,
Jana?
I love your story.
Oh, I don't know if you guys are ready for this. Okay, so I was like, okay, I'm going to find a middle pathway to do a temple recommend interview. And so I showed up as my authentic self, and it was a shit show because I was asking for agreement from someone who did not have the same directions that I had received. At one point when they were talking about the restoration, I was like, okay, I got this. Okay. So as long as the restoration, we can fully admit, is incredibly messy and that there's no real historical consistency, then I think I can be like, okay with it. And I mean, like his eyes. Oh, what was the sustain question? Oh,
the sustain question is my favorite.
Oh, the sustain was the best. So we started off this way. I was like, as long as sustain also equals I fundamentally disagree with, and my part in my spiritual practice is helping them be better. Right? Like, I'm just going to warn you. Like, Jana and I we've done it like all the wrong ways. Oh, yeah. So we can like come to you and be like, just so you know, if you're going into those situations, just be open to the outcome being different than one would assume.
Also be prepared that as you even start to get stronger in your own individuation or differentiation, you're under stress. And sometimes you revert and go, why the crap did I just hustle for my wellness with this person and their agreement for 2.5 hours? I know better.
Tell them what you did this time, Jana.
What did I do this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done many temple recommend interviews, and I've done them all differently, and they were all true to where I was at the time in my journey. But I've finally gotten to a place where I've just asked for, I said, just so you know, like we went down this road 4 years ago, and we were here for 2 hours, and you got all my essay answers. And I feel like we kind of got to where, it was uncomfortable for both of us, but, and I just said, just so you know, from now on, I'm just answering yes and no. There's no reason to put ourselves through this every time, right? And he just looked at me, he's like, okay. And then he did, I think, a very appropriate ask of trust. He just said, if something changes, will you just be sure then to let me know? And I thought that was a very adult conversation we got to.
And before we move on, I just want to make sure we hold space for our LGBTQIA+ loved ones. If you're asking your heteronormative leaders on directions for your emotional, mental, sexual, and physical well-being, you're asking for directions to places they've never been. And one of the most holy places I stand in is with parents of queer children trying to navigate this journey of recognizing the answers they are receiving are not in alignment with where their children and their children's wellness needs to go, because the directions we're asking, they've never been. We need to take some internal authority back. That doesn't mean it can't look in alignment with traditional beliefs or choices, but there has to be choice. There has to be choice for there to be wellness.
Move through things.
I know, Jen and I are talkers, so we're going to have to be fast. Owning our shadow. Okay, so most of us here have already been through the wilderness. We're sitting in it. It's really uncomfortable. So oftentimes this is why we're like, hey, peace out, bye. I'm like totally certain that I have the truthfulness. Everyone else is wrong. But the reality is we have to sit in our own shadow. Wherever we are in our spiritual development, we bring our light and we bring our dark. So the shadow work comes from Carl Jung, and it's often kind of talking about how, like, where we feel deeply triggered by someone else's words or actions. There's this inner tension that we feel, and instead we think that inner tension is always knowing versus recognizing where there's still growth for us, where that might be a part where we need to really get curious about that. A part of that is because it's so messy and it's so confusing, and understanding our own shadow and the biases that we come with is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But notice if you have moved into a realm of certainty that you know your choice is the choice for everyone else, there's some shadow work there. You've just skipped certainties. And granted, I think it's a funner form of certainty, but we have to really recognize that is not where we grow in development. That's not where wellness lives. And so in every stage of development, we have to look at the light and dark. And we usually know where our shadow is when we're really like, ooh, I don't like you. Ooh, I don't like you. I don't like what you believe in. I don't like what you, we really kind of taste it. And it's usually not our best selves. It's not the person we are with the kindest, best people we feel safe with. So we got to own that if we're really going to step into the next section of our journey.
And we've got to see where it will affect our assumptions about other people, right? So many people come to me and we are like working on a serious plan to like out themselves as a doubter or as stepping away from the church to their family and loved ones. And we spend people agonize over this for very good reason. And almost always they come back and go, it went so much better than I thought it would. Like, why? Because our shadow, all those deep fears, were projecting a persona, even on their loved ones, that wasn't theirs. So this is where shadow work can be really helpful, to just own what really are our deepest fears and how that is affecting our relationships. So what does integration look like? So this is where we get down to brass tacks, and I wanted you guys to be able to taste physically in your body and in your interactions what this looks like if you've done your shadow work and if you can step into yourself more fully. And this is a process. This is not like, oh, I learned to integrate and now I'm always on the integration side. I'm so well.
I have arrived.
When I get grilled, which has, I don't know, sometimes it happens, I get grilled by church leaders. I just go straight back to non-integration, 100%. If I'm under stress, if I'm with someone, I haven't planned what I'm going to say, I go into non-integration. When I'm my best self and on good days, I can show up in an integrated place, right? When you're non-integrated, you apologize internally. You're always very apologetic, versus when you're integrated, you don't do that as much. You can kind of just show up without apology. Your statements sometimes sound like questions when you're not integrated, rather than just kind of a strong statement of what is and how you feel. Your body language, a lot of times you're shrinking. What I will recommend to people, our body posture does a lot for our attitude, for how we feel inside. So if you're going to have a hard conversation, I always recommend people squaring their shoulders, own it in your body, and it does support this integrated stance. When you are non-integrated, you feel that discomfort, we immediately start to blame and scapegoat. I often say that marriage is one giant exercise in scapegoating. We tend to do that. When we're more integrated, we discern our responsibility. What is mine? What is yours? You can let go what's not yours. You can fully own it without shame. What is yours? Non-integrated tends to be more self-effacing versus affirming, deflects rather than just being willing to sit in discomfort when it comes safely. It's always good to safely sit in discomfort. If it's too much discomfort and you're being re-traumatized, remove yourself.
Notice, Jana, that we're usually really good at that in different realms of our life. Mm-hmm. So professionally, we can sit in a lot of discomfort. As a therapist, I can. Sometimes in the most intimate, challenging relationships in my life, that's harder. It matters. Notice where you're really good at it in some areas because there's competency there. Usually because there's a different level of accountability. Yeah. And so just notice. No, that's just, I see it all the time. Right?
When we're not integrated, we tend to speak what other people we think they want to hear versus just what we know and believe. We perform our feelings rather than being able to articulate our feelings. We are typically trying to manage the situation rather than just saying, I'm really uncomfortable right now. There's an air of inauthenticity that comes along with that. that when you're more integrated, you can be clearly sincere, and it frees you up when you're not protecting that shadow. It frees you up to be there and be empathetic and to feel with other people. Non-integrated, we desire certainty because we're just really wobbly. Rather than opening up, once we can get to a place where we're on more solid ground, it allows us also to open up into curiosity and vulnerability.
I notice how we're like, okay, I want to be integrated. How do I do that? All of it is a practice. These are behavioral practices, and it's a muscle.
It takes a long time.
It takes a long time.
Okay. Again, poetry. David Whyte. You're always going to get some David Whyte when you're with me. I just want to read this. He wrote this for someone who was actually leaving a marriage, but I often feel like emotionally it's very similar when you're wrestling with your faith. Above the mountains, the geese turn into the light again, painting their black silhouettes on an open sky. Sometimes everything has to be inscribed across the heavens so you can find the one line already written inside you. I want to say that again. Sometimes everything has to be inscribed across the heavens so you can find the one line already written inside you. Sometimes it takes a great sky to find that first bright and indescribable wedge of freedom in your own heart. Sometimes, with the bones of the black sticks left when the fire has gone out, someone has written something new in the ashes of your life. You are not leaving. Even as the light fades quickly now, you are arriving. So I'm heading into some reframing. And I have a huge disclaimer, and there's a reason I put this poem right before it, because I just want you to remember that sometimes everything has to be inscribed across the heavens so you can find the one line already written inside you, okay? We're people who, we maybe get wobbly with our faith, our religion, our religious stuff, and then we go to Sunstone and we go, tell me how to do it. Reframe my life, right? Okay, so these are some helpful reframes for me. I can't tell you this strongly enough, okay? For me. This is not for everybody, and we encourage you all to seek your own reframes, okay? But here are a few. I'm just going to go through them quickly. You can take pictures and think about this later. But knowing, we hate that phrase when we go through faith shift. Don't tell me you know a damn thing, okay? You know nothing. I know nothing. No one knows anything, okay? Unless there have been copious scientific experiments on this that have verified, then no, you can't know anything. We are talking about a different knowing, okay? When we're talking about our spirituality, this is a different knowing. It's more like, it doesn't require proof. It's more like, I know I love my kids. I know love heals. I know I come alive when. I know I feel joy when. I know stories of true kindness inspire me to spread love. You can know these things. I know these things. Don't ask me to prove it. Can't do it, but I know it, okay? That's a healthy kind of a knowing. This is that inner knowing, and you can claim it. Hated obedience for so long. Hate it. Right? Because, again, we're conflating. Obedience means, and you'll hear this in every talk, every correlated lesson about obedience, it's obedience to the structure. You got to do it right? What if obedience is to your own path, to what you know? What if that has power? Right? There's a big one, atonement. Right? Atonement, I just have my own feelings about this, but the way that we traditionally talk about it, I think it came from Augustine. Let's be clear, it came from someone who didn't like himself. So it kind of spreads this standard of unworthiness that for many people is really hard. For other people, it's life-saving, and I want to acknowledge that. But for me, I needed a reframe. It's no longer a set of rules, or it's no longer a plan that saves me from my unworthiness. For me, it is an invitation to communion in true at-one-ment, with or without a Jesus, with just the divine, with God, with me, sometimes with Jesus. Like, it's a choice, but there are other definitions. This is just what I want to invite you to see. So when someone at church says something about the atonement, I'm hearing it very differently than I used to. And I no longer get bugged by that, right? God, it's a big one. A lot of people start to wrestle with that, right? It doesn't have to be defined or understood, no longer purely external. It's this mystery, it's this unfolding, it's all that I can see and touch, it's my relationships. One of my favorite quotes from one of my spiritual mentors, James Finley, I'm not God, but I'm not God. So spirituality, not the same thing as religiosity, as we spoke about. It's no longer knowing or talking about or obeying God. It's experiencing God. It's the journey to uncover the unknown inner self and be aware of how it interacts with the world. Again, I've got a book on my shelf, truly. What is it? The spirituality of atheism, or I can't remember. It's a thing. Spiritual practice is no longer the 5 things for me. It's what moves my heart with the 3 questions. It's prophets are no longer just the head of our institution. It also includes those who speak the truth that resonates with my knowing. People who are speaking truth to power.
Brené.
Scripture are texts written by the prophets, whoever they are. My list of scriptural texts has exploded. I have a stack like this next to my bed that I haven't even touched yet. The most important part of all of this reframe, sometimes we just have to have it written out. We have not been taught to get curious about these things. I just want you to know how some people do it. I just want to give you examples of how you can do it. This is not the only way, and I put these in bold because I want you to really think about it. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What offends your soul in what I've just said? Go with that. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to me. Listen to your soul. What makes you more curious? What are the opportunities for exploration and some of these things for you that will work in the place that you are in with your faith, with your religiosity, with your families? What can you build on here?
Thanks, Jana. We were reading in the David White's Consolation book this week, and this just hit Jana and I like 1,000 pounds. So I wanted to bring it here for all of us. Human beings are always and always will be the frontier between what is known and what is not known. Self-knowledge includes understanding that the self we want to know is about to disappear. What we can understand is the way we occupy the frontier between the known and the unknown. Self-knowledge is not clarity or transparency or knowing how everything works. Self-knowledge is a fiercely attentive form of humility and thankfulness, coming to know the way we hold the conversation of life. I love that because it really grounds us in like the moment we think we know ourselves, just smile at yourself. Something will change. It's why this journey is so confusing and evolving and beautiful and glorious and messy. Because the minute I think I know something about myself, something changes. And we're always on that precipice, but if we can handle that kind of frontier of knowing and not knowing with gratitude, with a humility, with a surrender, with wonder and awe, there's health and wellness there.
Yeah, I just recently, a couple months ago, sat down with John DeLynn to do my Mormon story. And I think I probably said it like 15 times during it, but I'm just like, well, this is where I am today. You know, he's asking me how I'm interacting with my spirituality and with the church and everything. I'm like, well, this is where I am today. This would have been a very different interview a year ago, and I guarantee a year from now it would be a very different interview. So I hold that humility that I'm always changing, and there is no one way to do this.
And we need to hold that grace for other people. We have to allow them to become over and over and over again.
So as we said, this is a muscle. This is something you have to develop to do the integration, to do all of this work. And so, traveler, there is no path. The path is made by walking. We've been used to having a path. The world has given us a path. Our religions have given us a path. Our parents have often given us a path. Now you get to make the path by walking. That's what it is to own yourself, right?
And sometimes you need to like turn around, and sometimes you need directions, and sometimes you fall down, and sometimes you need to like sit on the side.
The path is rough, yo. It is. It's not.
And so beautiful.
It is. So, be wise. Safely take a step. Take that. Be vulnerable. Take a step. Maybe the wrong step. Check in with yourself. There is no bad, wrong step. Learn what there is to be learned and take the next right step. That's all this is. Take the next right step. It helps to get quiet and still, get curious, have really, really strong self-care practices that really help with your soul. Cultivate your support systems, let go of outcomes. Do your values work. Clarify, you're not completely beaconless, right? You've tasted what the light feels like in your life. I guarantee you have. Follow that wherever that takes you, and use those values. Get clear about what your values are. You can use those as guideposts.
I think honoring our values can also help us get clear about why we experience tension, especially within organized religion. I was raised to really value service and social justice and education. I came from these beautiful, beautiful parents. And at one time, sat my mom and dad down, and I was like, why are we surprised with who you've raised me to be, with the values I ingrained in me, that this would not be a struggle, right? Once again, why does this make sense? We can be proud of our values. The hardest part, guess what, is there's one value is not better than the other. They are just different. My dear loved ones, where their value is obedience, that's very different than social justice. To them, that is of equal significance to mine. There's a deep surrender in recognizing values do not have hierarchy.
I'm going to move through. I'm not going to hit all of these. I just want to let you all know that you're going to care what people think about. I have people come in my office all the time. It's like, I just care what people think in my family, in my, Well, if you didn't, you'd probably be a sociopath. So be grateful. Don't let go of that. It's normal. It's normal. It is not enlightened to not care what people think. It's just a little warning. Notice your trustworthiness. Notice that you've had good training. Notice your goodness. Notice you don't want to be a serial killer. Notice that and give yourself credit. Foster humility. Wisely tolerate discomfort, not too much discomfort. Know when you're being re-traumatized and keep yourself safe. But where you are able to safely sit in the discomfort, don't just move through it. Sit and feel it. There's wisdom. It's teaching you something. Name your fears. Name those emotions when they come up. Name where they're coming from. Recognize your ego needs and where they get in the way. I'm always going, why do I hate that? Because I want that person to think I'm brilliant. Yeah, okay, maybe what happens when I let go of that? What happens when I let go of that? Use a lens of love. I've never gone wrong with using a lens of love. Genuinely thinking through love. I remember one time I got a gift, sweet gift from a cute lady in my ward who had heard that I was struggling with my faith. And she brought me a Book of Mormon and this huge, long, handwritten quote about what to do when faith becomes weak. And my initial reaction, my shadow was all up over that going, she doesn't get me. Does she really think I don't have 50 Book of Mormons in my house? That's not going to fix me, and I need to let her know it's not going to fix me, and she's wrong. And then I sat back and went, lens of love, lens of love, lens of love. And then I saw it differently, and I saw, what this cute lady took, it was no short thing. She took some time. And that woman was trying, she was loving me. She was putting me first in that day to do what she knew how to do, to do something good for me.
Can I add on to that real quick, Jana?
Yeah.
We need to be really careful that there's this balance of really understanding a lens of love and giving people the benefit of the doubt. And I also want to give you the radical permission not to accept what is unacceptable to you. There's a really beautiful quote by Julie Diaz-Avedo Hanks, and when people ask her, how do you wrestle with X, Y, and Z, she's like, I give no time, energy, or power to wrestling with what is not acceptable. So if you know within yourself what is not acceptable for you, if that is racism, if that is homophobia, or if that is transphobia, that does not mean you second guess what are your boundaries in knowing. We can understand and see the world through a lens of love and graciousness and gratitude, but you're also able to claim what does or does not insult your soul.
Amen. I think we're just gonna move on and end here. We want to be able to take at least a couple of questions. Just this little excerpt from Mary Oliver.
I love this one.
Love Mary Oliver.
So when I know I'm in integration, my heart is like really soft. And I can feel like the ability to have like wonder and kindness both for myself and others. Like that's what that kind of feeling feels like, and this poem feels like that to both of us. You do not have to be good. You don't have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. And our greatest hope and wish for all of you today is to get curious about what you love, what allows you to come alive, what allows you to be soft and open and taste the wonder. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jana and Sara. That was amazing. We just have a few minutes. I know there are a few questions on the app, and we will wait for those later because you can respond to those later in messages. So we'll open it to any questions present. People here, if you would like to come up, you can come and ask a question.
And please come ask him on mic for the recording. And if we don't get to you here, please go to the app and ask it there. We're happy to answer questions in the app.
And please reach out. Like, we really sincerely mean that.
We love people.
Because we've received that level of love and compassion on our journey as well.
Yeah.
My question is just, how do you incorporate all of this into your life and still go to Relief Society and still enjoy conference and things like that?
I want to be really candid that not everyone can, right? So the question I really think we have to step into is, do you want to? Do you want to go to Relief Society? And if the answer in you is yes, then I think it's about getting really clear about 3 types of boundaries. When I'm experiencing and I'm in situations where I know I will agree and not agree with different things, this framing comes from Wendy Christensen, so we need to acknowledge her. Good friend and amazing therapist. She talks about, one, there's a boundary of knowing. So when someone says something in Relief Society that's cuckoo town, you just are like, that's not my truth. Just like internal boundary. Sometimes there's moments in Relief Society where we have to raise our hand, so a spoken boundary that says, my lived experience isn't like that. Can I honor and share with you mine, right? So a spoken boundary. Sometimes there needs to be a physical boundary, and sometimes that means removing ourselves from a Relief Society. I think adding a lens of love and recognizing that you are in a room of people who are at 1,000 different places, and that can we honor what shows up for them as their truth without having it have to be ours. That's this is a practice of surrender 100 times over. And I think allowing yourself, what is your purpose? If your purpose is community, can you allow that experience to be about community? But if it is about affirming to where you are, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? We have to go into these experiences with realistic ideas and a very clear intention.
And notice how this is about identity, right? Like if you walked into another faith, another church, another, tradition, and you walked in and you heard them saying something cuckoo town, that emotional experience is very different than getting it in your Relief Society, in your ward, in the place you grew up. And so you can just notice there, like, my identity is wrapped up in this. And so I often tell people, like, put up the force field as you're headed in. Become like a scientist. I'm just going to get really curious about what these people are feeling about things, but I don't have to take it on myself.
Another thing that happens when we shift from that stage 3 to a stage 4, what used to really feed us changes. So if Relief Society no longer feeds you, but you really want to go as a part of the community and out of like real gratitude for learning and sitting with other people, then I need you to also make sure you're feeding your spiritual wellness outside of that experience, because no longer sometimes does it feel as nourishing, and your wellness still absolutely matters. So that might mean a walk with an incredible spiritual book, or that might mean a deep spiritual practice that allows you to not rely on Relief Society to fill you like it once did. And like that's what Jana said, if our practices aren't kind of turning over every few years, then we're not getting the nourishment we need every few years. Even with, like, I'm really into gardening right now. You have to change the soil, right? So there's different nutrients. If we're going to keep planting our wellness in the same piece of earth, we're going to have to infuse it. So think about what brings you joy if the Relief Society experience is a wrestle.
Also diversify your belonging to other places as well, so that you know that that the hook for you to be there is about that being genuinely a place where you want to be, that you've made the choice. Right? That it's not just everything in me is going to feel like an outsider and I'm going to be eaten by wolves if I'm outside that belonging. Like, cultivate belonging in other places as well. And I'll just end with one last quick thing. This was another question I asked Richard Rohr, was about, because so many people stay to try to be part of the change, right? And I'm like, how realistic is that for me? Like, this is the guy who wrote the whole pamphlet on living on the edge of inside, And one of the biggest things he said to me is, make sure that you are taking time for yourself and your own spiritual wellness. It's probably not good to just go every single time. If you are constantly in a place where you are made to feel like a heretic, or you feel like a heretic, it is not good for your spiritual well-being. So make sure you are taking space for yourself where you need it.
The majority of people who've been on this path and remain within the institution have taken sabbaticals. In most faith traditions, that's a really common spiritual practice. We don't really know what to do with that here. And while we care what people think, the invitation is, I need you to care about what you think and what you need more.
And sometimes it's not safe to take a physical sabbatical, but take one in your mind. Like, they have these really cool little earbuds that are so small. It fits right inside your ear, and it's just me and the podcast, baby. And I'm physically there, but I'm not really engaging. Like, take the breaks the way you need to take the breaks.
And know that it'll shift and change,
It will.
and that's okay.
It will always shift and change. Any other questions, please, in the app, or come talk to us.
Yeah. Thank you so much again. If you'd like, again, you can put questions. There's also a chat if you just want to make a comment. Let them know what you thought. Thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of the symposium.